Can you give us a sense of where you and your colleagues are on trying to hammer out this deal?
Well, let's put it in context. The one person who's really happy about the fact that we're not getting aid to Ukraine by the end of the year is Vladimir Putin. And I think we need to all remember that he thought he could outweigh the West, outweigh the U.S., and I hope and pray that's not the case. And, I could also say, am I frustrated that we didn't have bigger involvement of the White House and more involvement of the Minority Leader McConnell 2 weeks ago? Absolutely. These talks didn't get super serious until the last few days in terms of drafting.
When you say White House, do you mean proxies or President Biden himself?
No, listen, no. I think, the president has said he would make changes. I think sending his top folks to help draft this, because I think you're going to see the border's a mess and there needs to be substantial changes. But every one of these questions have got, even if you say if there's a break glass provision or, too many people are coming in, what are the provisions? There's 3 layers of questions beyond that if you just take that one issue. So it's complicated. It has taken more time. Frankly, if Schumer had not brought us back, I don't think the progress that had been made over the weekend would have been made. Do I wish we could have said, and I still am a little bit hopeful, before Christmas you'll get a bipartisan indication that, maybe not white smoke, but we're getting close to white smoke, because both sides have said this is essential. And if we can't get to yes in the Senate, we're never going to get through the House.
But quantify that for us, if you would, Senator. What progress was made, and why did the talks fall apart?
Oh, I think it was the opposite of falling apart. It's one thing to say, here are the 4 categories on border changes. It's another thing to say, okay, let's talk about specifics. Let's start drafting legislation. That takes time. Again, if I could have, had what I wish would have happened, I wish the seriousness of these would have started 2 weeks ago, because I think it could have gotten done. But this is enormously complicated, and obviously Ukraine.
That means you think it'll get done, though, in the first 2 weeks of the new year?
I think it'll get done. And I'm also very aware of the fact that even if there was 95% of a deal done this week, to leave all those details hanging out, to be attacked by extremes on either end, or to be attacked by Donald Trump, who I'm sure will be against whatever comes up. He's not been favorable on Ukraine. He's always seems to be in favor of whatever Putin wants. And as you guys said before the break, actually getting a substantial change on the border might be good for our country, might be good for the economy even, but I'm not sure that would be good for Donald Trump.
Another issue facing
let the
the
details
administration.
sink.
Another issue facing the administration and some allies as well of yours, of the Democratic Party, is this Japanese company agreement to buy U.S. steel. We heard from Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman expressing his concern over this deal yesterday. I want you to take a listen to what he said.
I've always maintained that steel is security, national security, and the fact that now they're claiming that they're going to sell this to a foreign company, it's outrageous.
It's also not every day that you see Senator Fetterman alongside J.D. Vance as well agreeing on this. What do you make of this deal? Are you as well irked and up in arms?
Well, first of all, I think both senators are right. We need, when we think of national security, it's beyond tanks and guns and ships and planes. It's why we did the CHIPS bill to bring semiconductor production back. It's why we called out Huawei, the Chinese telecom provider. This one is a little more nuanced. Japan is an ally. Do I like the fact that, a Japanese company is buying what used to be the largest corporation in the world with its storied history? But before I weigh in, I want to look at the details. I also want to make sure what assurances have been given that critical supply chain, because that's, I think, where this could be vulnerable, was not going to be moved out of the United States. Not only the labor contracts, but long-term, the American production of steel is, as we saw during COVID, we cut off those supply chains, and we're in a mess.
I'd like to ask you, from your perch as chair of the Intelligence Committee, Senator, what's happening overseas right now, specifically in the Middle East, as you debate potential funding for Israel? There have been calls for the IDF, and the White House is getting an earful on this, to be more precise in its pursuit of Hamas, to actively spare civilian life in a new way, maybe a new phase And I wonder what you're hearing about this. There's talk now of a new potential truce. The CIA director arriving in Warsaw to talk with Qatar about establishing maybe a new period of time in which hostages can be released. Will you have an announcement potentially to coincide with the Christmas holiday to that end?
Listen, I think it would be great news if there was another pause and we could get some of those hostages back. There was a family that's an Israeli family that grew up in Virginia. Their young son, Hirsch, was one of the hostages who had his arm blown off after the horrific activities at the music festival. I feel like it is my personal duty to try to help get that young man out. So that pause, as well as the fact 18,000 plus Palestinians dead, that is an enormous cost. And my fear, as somebody who's a supporter of Israel, is Israel could lose the hearts and mind of nations all around the world, and increasingly the hearts and minds of young people. So one of the things that I'll be putting out with a lot of other senators, either later today or tomorrow, is calling on the Israeli government to say one of the signs of goodwill is you could go ahead and start paying again the Palestinian authorities in the West Bank. And remember, these are the security forces that are keeping the peace on the West Bank. They've not been basically paid since October 7th. The fact that they're still going to work, that wouldn't affect what's happening in Gaza, but it would show, again, a bit of a more humane face from the Israeli government. And I do think there are things that the administration is trying to quietly push to make sure that we don't see these images of the non-precision bombing, so that yes, Israel needs to go after Hamas, but they have to do it, I think, again, with more precision, as the administration said. And I think there's an awful lot of us on both sides of the aisle that understand that.
Well, the administration is pressuring Israel to wind down this war. At the same time, the administration is debating amongst themselves whether or not they are going to take military action against the Houthis, potentially getting involved in another conflict. How concerning is this for you and your colleagues?
Well, let's remember, when we go back to the supplemental in Ukraine and the border, there are two other pieces of that. One is about $14 billion of aid for Israel, but it's also about $10 billion of humanitarian aid that will go not just to Gaza, but will also go to a nation like Jordan, whose economy since October 7th has been reeling, and Jordan is one of our strongest allies. So that is critically important. The Houthis have said, and the Houthis too often are a client of Iran, that they were going to continue this illegal activity of trying to, go after shipping in the Red Sea as long as the war is going on. So if it's scaled back, maybe they'll cut back, but I don't trust the Houthis. I do think it's important that this coalition the administration has announced, about 15 nations, and I hope we see more Middle Eastern nations who frankly benefit from traffic through the Red Sea, participate in that coalition. But I'm following very closely. So far, we've taken down a lot of the drones. But I do know it's under serious consideration whether you go after the source of some of the drones and some of their launching pads, and I'm going to be following that very closely.
Senator, I want to ask you lastly about your Financial Artificial Intelligence Risk Reduction Act. We've been talking a lot about AI on Bloomberg, and this is obviously something that's a priority for you. I just wonder to what extent AI has already infected the financial services industry.
Well, the two areas that AI right now could have a dramatic negative effect on. One is faith in our political elections, and we've already seen deep fakes and manipulation of political ads. The other is the same kind of manipulation of public stocks. I'm amazed that we've not seen more of it. Candidly, these tools are at such scale and speed. So this legislation, not trying to boil the ocean, and with my friend John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana, we say, let's give FSOC, the arbiter of all the regulators, to kind of look at this holistically. If there was ever a job that FSOC should take on, this ought to be it. And let me be the first to acknowledge FSOC's record is kind of checkered. Secondly, if an AI tool is used to manipulate the markets, we ought to go ahead and use treble damages. That already exists in law. And we ought to say to some of these AI tool makers, if you should have known, there would be some level of liability if your tool is illicitly used for manipulation. I think this is targeted, because my fear would be, you guys at Bloomberg have breaking news one day and we say, and I don't think it'll be a Fortune 50 stock, but a Fortune 100 to 500 stock suddenly has had a dramatic swing because of AI manipulation, and then we might overreact.